Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going through another character of our character archive. We've now made our way through the last little bit of Sumeru characters in the character archive, and we made our way over to Tighnari, one of the first 5 stars that Sumeru has thrown at us. Now looking at Tighnari, he's an extremely good character. A lot of people are going to be mainly using him as a quick swap DPS. The idea between that usually means that you have 2 DPS characters that have very little time on field usually, and they like to jump between each other and can work extremely well with one another. And usually you'll see Tighnari, once again we'll get into this more in the team section, but usually you'll see that character, specifically Tighnari, with a character like Raiden, just because they have some great synergy with each other. Now, looking at Tighnari, he is going to be a bow character, so looking at a lot of what he has to offer is usually meaning that he's going to have some things that's going to be a little bit annoying. He's going to have some charge attacks, and that can get a little annoying whenever you're trying to actually go ahead and attack things and, have to worry about charge time and getting knocked out of that charge time. But there are parts of his kit that actually allow him to kind of keep the pressure off himself, which is going to be a very big part of his kit. But once again, let's go ahead and jump like normal into looking at the actual talent leveling priorities. So looking first and foremost, you should be leveling the most into your normal attack talent. The reason why is because most of your damage is coming from these things called the wreath arrows and also the cluster bloom arrow damage. Now, once again, once we actually go into the skills, we'll actually talk about it. But in terms of leveling priority, you're going to want to mainly focus into this talent. Afterwards, you're going to want to focus into the burst because it's got a nice big shot of damage as well as some extra bits of damage that comes afterwards that's actually bigger than the initial hit. And then you can go and level into your skill at the end. The thing with the skill is that it's a nice little bit of damage, but honestly, because it's the initial, skill hit, it's not going to be doing anything crazy. I really do feel like the normal attacks into then the burst are probably the only things you're going to level into heavily. And then, kind of your skill is kind of last thing that you're going to level into. If you level it past 6 or 8, I'd be surprised. I would probably bring it to 8 myself while almost crowning the normal attack and the burst. Now, going ahead and looking at the actual talent info for all of our different things as well as our passive talents, the charge attack is really, once again, where Tighnari kind of shines. He has 2 different versions, obviously, with your charge attack characters. We have your first charge level, which is he just fires off a regular dendro arrow. Nothing really special there, but he also has a second charge level, so if you hold it a little bit longer, he will fire off a wreath arrow that deals dendro damage, and upon hit, the wreath arrow will create 4 cluster bloom arrows that will track nearby opponents automatically and deal dendro damage. Now what that basically means is that this level 1 aim shot is going to do 133% damage, but the idea though, if you want to keep this in mind, is when you do once again, getting to the level 2, it's technically, it's less damage whenever you do a wreath damage arrow. So basically once you get to charge level 2, it's technically less damage than what you would see in level 1. But keep in mind that there are going to be a bunch of other things, 4 other cluster bloom arrows that are coming out and doing a set amount of damage as well. So honestly, while running this with Tighnari, that's going to be the biggest way he's going to do things. Now, if we want to go ahead and actually look at what he does and guess how that actually looks. So here's a regular version of his, this is charge level 1. And that's what it's going to do. Just a regular dendro arrow. Nothing special. There you go. Not kind of just a regular thing that you're going to do here. Now, if we actually take the time to go 1 and then wait for it to come again, 2. Now this is what it is going to be, the cluster bloom arrow. Take the hit, and then you can see those extra kind of damage, the cluster bloom arrows hit afterwards. There's 4 different arrows that are then going to, as soon as you hit an enemy, they will immediately track onto them. Now, since I'm not hitting anything, they are not going to track on anything, obviously, as of yet. They're just going to track into the arrow that I initially hit. So, that's kind of the idea with Tighnari and how he kind of works with his charge attacks. Very, very nice, consistent high bits of damage and a little bit more consistently, especially while he's on field. And honestly, the other parts of his skills and bursts are going to help a little bit more with that. So, jumping into his skill, this is a very good part of his skill that I actually do like, because while throwing out this, it's going to be doing some AoE dendro damage. That's the initial skill hit we were talking about. But honestly, I don't even think that that's the biggest part of this skill. It creates the Vijnana Khanda field that creates mysterious illusions that taunt enemies and draw their fire. Now basically what this is going to look like, and the reason why it's so good, and once again I talked about how you would have to use a shielder to kind of protect him while he's getting ready to do this kind of charge time, because you can get hit and knocked out of this, right? But you want to make sure you're doing that damage. Well, if he throws his skill, this creates a field, and you can see the different illusions, the little kind of things right here and there. They're kind of doing little bits of kind of just illusions to basically trigger a lot of extra help from Tighnari to kind of focus on, okay, focus on these guys, don't focus on me so that I can actually do the most of the damage. Now, additionally, Tighnari gains the Vijnana Suffusion effect, which will decrease the Wreath Arrow's charging time by 2.4 seconds. So when you use the skill, that actual extra time getting to the Wreath's arrow is actually going to take less time. So if we take the time here to do a regular charge shot, it's going to take a little bit of extra time to get to that last stance, right? But if I throw out this skill and then do this, you can already see I'm already there immediately, no matter what. And I can do it up to 3 times, which we'll kind of get to later on why that is only happening 3 times. But you can honestly get to that point, and honestly, that's why I like it so much, using the skill and going right into it. At the end of the skill, this is where it talks about this effect will dissipate once the skill duration ends, so either the entirety of 8 seconds, or you will fire off 3 arrows. Actually, I believe this is the 12 seconds. So either you're focusing either on making sure the skill duration, which is going to be the 12-second duration, is going to be ending, which you're probably going to be getting these off a little bit quicker than that. But most of the time, it's just going to be those 3 wreath arrows that you're shooting off that I kind of showed you. And now, once again, the whole reason of this, and you don't even have to be in that field. I can stay over here, and it's already kind of away from me, so you don't have to be inside the field and kind of put yourself at risk. But it allows you to put a lot of damage out on field at one time. And already, after doing some things and maybe some setup with some other characters, I already have it again, and I can go back and do some extra damage. And I'm already good to go for most of what Tighnari can do with other characters. So honestly, very, very good. Love his skill, and it's a little bit more useful in terms of what it can do, like in its extra mechanics, to kind of keep the heat off of Tighnari rather than the actual damage that it gives off. But looking at the burst, on the other hand, it's something where you can kind of get some extra bursts of damage. The burst basically fires off 6 Tanglevine shafts that can track opponents and deal dendro damage. After they hit, the Tanglevine shafts will create a secondary wave of Tanglevine shafts that can also track nearby opponents and deal dendro damage on hit. Now, like normal, basically, you have your initial damage hit, your Tanglevine shafts, that will do the initial damage hit of just being 60%. And once again, that's going to be, multiple of these are going to be happening, 6 of them at one time, and then a second wave of another 6 are coming out doing a little bit of a higher multiplier. So this is helping a little bit more with more damage that he can do, and how that looks is right here. So he'll shoot off 6, there's 6, and then once again you see kind of a little bit more of that sporadic kind of hits in the middle afterwards, which once again, a lot of consistent damage hits and a lot of things that are going on here so that you can have high application with a lot of damage. It makes him a very easy character to use. Now, looking at his first passive talent, after Tighnari fires off a Wreath Arrow, his Elemental Mastery is increased by 50 for 4 seconds. So if we go ahead and just basically, I'll just wait a few seconds to make sure that none of my, basically none of that time period is happening here. We'll look at his Elemental Mastery here. We see he's at 396 Elemental Mastery. Now, if I go ahead and just do a regular Wreath Arrow, and I'll make sure to get to the second charge time, I'll do that. It's once again for 4 seconds, and you can already see it went from 396 to 446, so he's still increasing that extra time, the extra Elemental Mastery for the time period that he's in, which is once again very good because, as you can see here, you don't really need that buff for very long, which is also why he's a quick, kind of that quick idea of quick swapping between him and Raiden. You can go over here and switch to Raiden's skill, go back to Tighnari, do this, multiple shots, and this is allowing, once again, Wreath Arrows to go out, increasing your Elemental Mastery, still staying at that 446 as well, higher than you were before, keeping that Elemental Mastery high so that you can make sure to do a lot of extra damage, because if you look at a lot of the extra damage that he does, it's all based on actual just pure attack percent. No matter what, his entire kit's based off attack percent. But now let's go ahead and look at the extra Elemental Mastery that's going to be buffing his charge attacks as well as the shaft damage that you can get from the burst. And this is where kind of other characters dual scale and actually show, for instance, Al-Haytham on the other hand, will actually show in his kit attack percent and Elemental Mastery. Whereas someone like Tighnari, who does work on both Elemental Mastery and attack, his only actual skill attributes say attack. The reason why you can work a lot with Elemental Mastery is because of the second passive talent. For every point of Elemental Mastery Tighnari possesses, his charge attack and Fashioner's Tanglevine shaft damage from his burst are increased by 0.06%. The maximum damage bonus obtainable this way is 60%. Basically, if you can pull this over 1, 2, 3 times, that is 1,000 Elemental Mastery that you can have to cap out this specific passive talent. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think you're going to get this even from the 50 from here, the 50 that you get, or 50 to 80 that you could get from the extra resonance, 250 from getting something from the buff that you would get from Nahida, giving you 250 elemental mastery, and even some pieces here that you can already see are pretty leveled anyways. I really do just feel like he's not going to probably be able to get he'll get extremely close, and you can definitely get him to 1,000, but I think it's probably worth it if you're getting, if you're going over 1,000 elemental mastery with Nahida buffs and everything else. You probably want to focus a little bit more into some crit or some attack to make sure you're balancing out your ratio a little bit better. Speaking of talking about balancing out a ratio a little bit better, let's go ahead and talk about some weapons that you're going to be using for Tighnari. Now, Tighnari does, even though he is a standard character 5-star, he does have his own personal weapon. His own personal weapon is Hunter's Path, and we don't really talk about Hunter's, or kind of the weapons here for the personal characters too much, because obviously they're going to be the best in slot no matter what you're going to really be using. Obviously, this weapon is extremely good. I do love the high amount of crit rate you can get here. It is a lower base attack, but once again, you can make up from that with a lot of extra other things, as well as other characters that can maybe give you some buffs. But honestly, I feel like the high amount of crit rate here is going to help him with a much better ratio. So if you do have this weapon, plus its ability, it's just going to be extremely, extremely good, obviously because it is his own personal weapon. Another weapon you could use instead, though, if you have an extra one, you accidentally got one, or maybe you had got an extra one while you were running for Yelan. If you have Aqua Simulacra, this is another secondary weapon that you could use for him. Obviously, Aqua Simulacra just has a high amount of crit damage at 88.2% at level 90. And then also the ability, the HP increase, I guess, is okay because it'll help, Tighnari with her survivability, but it doesn't help with damage. But the other part of it states that when there are opponents nearby, the damage dealt by the wielder of this weapon is increased by 20%, which means, once again, you're still getting a damage buff, and you can still take part of the ability from the refinement stat. Another weapon you could use that is on here as well is Polar Star. That is Child's weapon, so if you happen to have gotten that as well, or an extra one, you didn't really want it, you could use that. Now, once again, just a high amount of crit rate with a good amount of attack as well in the middle, while also helping a lot of normal attack, charge attacks, elemental skill, and burst damage increases, kind of helping a little bit more of an all-rounder weapon. And now you can see here, I'm running the first great magic. Now, the reason I have two of these weapons is because I was going after Arlecchino's weapon, and sadly, I got two of these before I got her weapon. And so one of them was great because it could go on Tighnari, but sadly, the other one I had to throw somewhere else. So sadly, hopefully you guys didn't get that bad of luck. But if you do have the first great magic, I actually really do like this weapon. It does mainly go for Linny, but honestly, the 66.2% crit damage at level 90, plus a good amount of base attack, isn't really that bad, plus a lot of attack that you can get from here as well, while also helping movement speed, which with Tighnari is probably not crazy, but honestly, once again, he's going to want to stay out of danger, so the extra movement speed isn't going to be terrible. Now, the ability states that for every party member with the same elemental type as the wielder will gain one gimmick stack. And when you have 1, 2, 3, or more gimmick stacks, attack will increase by 16, 32, and 48%. So most likely, when you have characters of the same elemental type, you'll probably be running double Dendro anyways with Tighnari, just because that's how it's going to kind of work. So you'll at least be able to get a good 16% attack from this ability, and you'll probably be running two other characters that are different elemental types, which goes here for every party member with a different elemental type from the wielder, gain one theatric stack, and you'll probably be getting a 7% movement speed bonus most of the time with most of the teams that you're going to be running with Tighnari, and 16% attack as well, while only having one of those gimmick stacks. Now, if you have three, Dendro characters and one Electro character or whatever, or maybe a Bloom character, something like that, that could also work extremely well, considering you're going to get another two extra characters that are going to give you more. So that's going to be 32% attack, and you'll only be getting one 4% movement speed buff. So honestly, once again, getting more Dendro characters is nice, but you also don't really want to do, because Dendro works really well with having multiple different kind of reactions, you want to constantly be reacting. Mono Dendro really usually isn't the way to go, but don't really worry about kind of going for the different stacks. It'll happen naturally, and don't worry about it because the attack that you can get at 16, 32, or 48 is still extremely good no matter which stacks that you have. Now, looking at some other weapons besides 5-star weapons, you could go ahead and run some other weapon named Fading Twilight. Now, this weapon is a energy recharge main stat weapon, which a lot of people are going to say is probably not that great, which, once again, you're probably not wrong, but this weapon does have a pretty good refinement ability. And considering it was an event weapon, it is free to play. It states that it has 3 different states: Even Gleam, Afterglow, and Dawn Blaze, which increase damage dealt by 12, 20, and 28% respectively. When attacks hit opponents, this weapon will switch to the next state. This weapon can change states once every 7 seconds, and the character equipping this weapon can still trigger the state switch while not on the field. Now, the entire idea here is to basically be quick swapping consistently. That's the kind of the idea here, is you'll be kind of getting the initial damage hit, kind of get that 12% damage increase. Quick swap over to Raiden, go over to your supports, set up a new rotation. 7 seconds should pass by the time you get back to Tighnari through Raiden and the other support characters. And then you'll probably already have, then once you do damage again, you'll be at the 20% mark. And then you'll basically just keep going through rotations. Every rotation, you'll just kind of be getting higher and higher damage with this weapon, and that's why I think most of the time you're going to be using this specifically. Now, looking at another weapon besides Fading Twilight, 2 weapons that are not going to be free-to-play options, but they are Battle Pass options, and they are crit main stat weapons, which is always going to be pretty good for them, is going to be Scion of the Blazing Sun and the Viridescent Hunt, which I have over here at level 90. Now, with Scion of the Blazing Sun, they both have the same amount of crit rate at level 90, but with Scion of the Blazing Sun, after a charge attack hits an opponent, a Sunfire arrow will descend upon the opponent hit, dealing 60% attack as damage, and applying the Heat Seer effect to the opponent damaged by the arrow for 10 seconds. Opponents affected by the Heat Seer take 28% more charge attack damage from the wielder, and a Sunfire arrow can be triggered once every 10 seconds, which once again, that's going to be able to happen every single time you're coming back on a rotation from and with Tighnari. In my personal opinion, you should be able to have a good 10 seconds before you come back to him, always allowing you to have this extra 28% charge attack damage increase against the enemies that are taking the hit. This weapon's a little bit more specific for probably specifically just bosses, so that you can always be having that Heat Seer effect is on that specific opponent over and over again. Whereas if obviously they're mobs and whatever, if you kill that mob, then you have to get the Heat Seer effect from the arrow on another enemy. So honestly, this is probably a little bit of a better weapon for kind of bosses. But Viridescent Hunt, on the other hand, once again, same amount of crit rate at level 90, and upon hit, normal charge attacks have a 50% chance to generate a Cyclone, which continuously attracts surrounding opponents. It's a small wind tunnel that kind of helps smaller to medium mobs kind of get just pulled together a little bit, helping you and other characters, possibly once again switching over to Raiden, have a little bit of an easier time hitting multiple targets at once, considering you have a lot of AoE in a lot of the kits between the quick swap characters. This will be dealing 40% of your attack as damage to these opponents every 0.5 seconds for 4 seconds, and this effect can only occur once every 14 seconds. Once again, those blue numbers are changing based on the refinement rank. So honestly, I do feel like it's pretty good because it's hitting, and it doesn't have a cap on how many enemies it can hit. If the Cyclone is hitting 20 characters or 20 enemies somehow, then it's going to be doing that amount of damage to all of them. So it is nice to know that even if you're only hitting, a little bit of a damage, increase, it's still hitting 3 opponents at the same time, most likely, especially if there's adds and whatnot, pulling them together, making it easier once you quick swap over to someone like Raiden to do a lot of damage against those specific characters instead of kind of having them all spread out. You could also use another weapon named Range Gauge, which is an attack percent bow. You could also use a weapon, Range Gauge, which is an attack percent bow. At level 90, it's 27.6% attack with 565 base attack. This is going to be a nice weapon because you'll be able to put up a unity symbol when you are healed or someone else heals you, basically. The entire idea, though, is that when you're using your elemental skill or burst, you'll basically be getting a symbol once you get when you are healed or you heal others, which in Tighnari's case, he's going to be the one that's getting healed. He'll be able to then, all symbols that he uses, you can get a maximum of 3 of these. Once you get all 3, you'll consume them when you use a skill or burst, based on how many of these sigils you have. For each symbol consumed, gain 3% attack and 7% all elemental damage bonus. So once again, a little bit more of an attack and elemental damage bonus buff here. Once again, you're probably going to have to focus on a little bit more of a crit ratio if you're going for these attack percent or energy recharge bows, but it shouldn't really be that too much of an issue when you're kind of running at it at the end of the day. Now, a weapon you could also use is Windbloom Ode. The idea with this weapon is that it's Elemental Mastery main stat, which, once again, if you kind of are running an attack percent sans or something like that, this could help. Even with an Elemental Mastery sans, this is helping a little bit more because especially with the ability, after using an elemental skill, which we see he uses pretty consistently, you receive a boon from the Ancient Wind of the Windbloom. increasing attack by 16% for 6 seconds, already giving you a little bit of an attack buff anyways there. So honestly, I do feel like this is a pretty good weapon as well that I did want to bring up. But once again, you're still going to have to focus on a pretty good crit ratio for Tighnari outside of this. Now that we're taking a look over at artifacts, let's go ahead and look at different sets you're going to want to use. I do feel like the best set is going to be the 4-piece Wanderer's Troop, with the 2-piece increasing elemental mastery by 80, and the 4-piece increasing charge attack damage by 30% if the character uses a catalyst or a bow, which you are going to be using. So it's very nice, it's very easy to get because all you have to do is just have a bow, and it increases some elemental mastery as well. A very good 4-piece set. Another set that you could use if you really wanted to is going to be the Gilded Dreams 4-piece set. It also increases elemental mastery in the 2-piece, and then if you create an elemental reaction within 8 seconds of doing so, the character equipping this will obtain buffs based on the elemental type of the other party members, much like kind of actually using the weapon I use, the First Great Magic. Although this thankfully has a little bit of a better buff for specifically Tighnari. The attack is increased by 14% for each party member whose elemental type is the same as the equipping character. Once again, most likely you'll be running double Dendro, double Electro, so having one party member that's the same, giving you 14% attack, and then 2 other party members that are going to be of a different element down here are going to give 50 for each party member that has a different elemental type, so those 2 Electro characters will be giving you 100 elemental mastery. So for the 8 seconds after you trigger an elemental reaction, you're going to be getting 14% attack and 100 elemental mastery, which this could allow you once again to get closer to that 1000 mark whenever we're looking at the second passive talent over here for the extra bonus damage for your charge attacks and for your burst hits. So I do feel like honestly those are the best 4-piece sets. I wouldn't really run too much else. You can do 2-piece of elemental mastery and I don't know, dendro damage bonus from one of the other sets like Deepwood. Run a 2-piece of this and a 2-piece of this. At the end of the day, if you really want to, if no other character on your team is running a 4-piece of Deepwood, you could run this as well, because after you use a skill and it hits an opponent, the dendro resistance of the enemies that are hit by it are going to be decreased by 30%. Honestly, this is more supportive, but if no one else on your team is running this set, then you're probably going to want to run Deepwood Memories for Tighnari. Even still, I think Wanderer's Troop still beats it out at the end of the day. Even if nobody on your team is running a Deepwood, Deepwood just does kind of help a little bit more for personal damage if you kind of have some really good pieces on Deepwood. But like I said, you could kind of run a 2-piece of dendro damage bonus, a 2-piece of elemental mastery from any of these sets, or 2-piece attack and 2-piece elemental mastery, 2-piece attack and 2-piece dendro damage bonus, kind of just combining some of these here and there. You don't really care too much about, you know, extra energy or whatever from these other sets. Just once again, attack, dendro damage bonus, and elemental mastery are going to be the 2-piece sets that you're kind of jumping after for Tighnari. Now let's go ahead and look at main stats. When looking at the Sands, I would heavily suggest going for an Elemental Mastery Sands. Once again, the ability at the end is going to be helping more damage. That second passive talent is going to make a lot of work happen for you, as well as once again, you're creating a lot of spread most likely with him, so doing that's going to increase his damage even more the higher your Elemental Mastery is. Going and looking at your goblet, if you really want to, by the way, in your sands, if you have a lot of extra elemental mastery and you're kind of getting a little close to that 1000, you could switch over to an attack percent sands to just make life a little bit easier. Also, that'll also help just your straight up regular multipliers, so that's not really a problem either at the end of the day. Looking at a goblet, I would not suggest going after an elemental mastery goblet. It's really not the best way to go. Go for a dendro damage bonus goblet. Yes, I know he already ascends into dendro damage bonus, but still dendro damage bonus I've seen do the best for him as a character. Now looking at the circlet, once again, you're going to want to go for crit rate or crit damage. Make sure you just have a pretty good ratio between crit rate and crit damage at the end of the day. Making sure you have a good, at least probably around 60% crit rate for your DPS characters. Even higher would be better, especially since he hits a little bit more often. You want all of those little hits that he does to crit to make sure you're doing as much damage, even though he is quick swapping with another character most of the time. When we're looking at substats for this, basically look for just EM, attack percent, and double crit. Don't really worry too much about anything else. And yes, the burst is helpful and necessary for kind of just helping a little bit more, and the second passive talent actually does help a lot. But honestly, with such a low energy cost, just allow your other teammates to feed you. Once again, on a double electro team getting a lot of particles back, it should just be pretty easy to get his burst back, and it's really not that necessary to really use consistently. You're mainly focusing on using your skill right into your charge attacks to make sure you're doing damage that way for quick swapping. If the burst is there, use it at the beginning of rotation, and that's kind of it. Now taking a look at Tighnari's constellations, his first constellation is very coveted considering Tighnari's charge attack crit rate is increased by 15%. And most of the people probably going to this video are probably either at C0 or C1, or they don't have him, they're trying to get to C1 because they're trying to get to that point, they don't have Tighnari or they have him at C0 to get to C1 because this is really, really good. Tighnari's charge attack crit rate is increased by 15%. A lot of people like it, and with the anniversary coming up, they're really looking to grab Tighnari or get that first constellation for him to make sure that he can crit on those charge attacks and make him a little bit more useful on their account. Now, the second constellation states that when there are opponents within the Vijnana Khanda field created by the skill, Tighnari gains a 20% Dendro damage bonus. And this effect will last up to 6 seconds if the field's duration ends or if it no longer has opponents in it. So, once again, a very nice buff to Dendro damage bonus, which here it goes into, but honestly, it's still a very nice help to see. The third constellation increases the burst by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the skill by 3. Now looking at the fourth constellation, when the burst is unleashed, all nearby party members gain 60 elemental mastery for 8 seconds, and if the burst trigger all those little hits that it does, if those trigger burning, bloom, quicken, or spread reactions, the elemental mastery of the characters, once again, they're getting the already 60 elemental mastery of the other party members. If you're already getting the 60 and once again, these burst hits are triggering any type of Dendro reaction, then you're going to be getting another 60 elemental mastery for all the party members as well, going up to 120 elemental mastery for all nearby party members. Now looking at the C6, it states that Wreath Arrow's charging time is decreased by 0.9 seconds, and will produce one additional Cluster Bloom arrow upon hit, and this arrow deals 150% of Tighnari's attack as damage. Now, I think this C6 is very nice because it's almost taking your charge time down by 0.9 seconds, which even if you're outside of your normal time period of, once again, using your skill and getting that extremely low decreased time of cooldown while you're doing the charge attacks, as I showed you before, then this is helping once again that C6 even more. So if you do happen to get this standard character a lot, honestly, he's got some of the better constellations in my personal opinion as a Dendro character as well, helping a lot with elemental mastery as well as more personal damage, as well as just more consistent damage with other types of consistent hits that he can do. So a lot of great constellations that can come out of Tighnari, but I do know that the first constellation is a very, favored one. So if you are here to kind of look at should you kind of get Tighnari, I do heavily suggest you go after it from the anniversary if you can. Now looking at teams, we've already talked about kind of the idea behind looking mainly at quicken teams and spread teams. The entire idea with this team is to make sure that Tighnari and a quick swap DPS are constantly going back and forth between being on field and off field between the two, while having your supports being very helpful off field with long cooldown times, or basically long duration times, to make sure they have their abilities constantly going on. Baizhu, Yao Yao, characters like that are really great Dendro healers to make sure they're constantly healing over a long period of time, even between quick swapping DPSs as well. There's a very long duration of heals as well as a pretty good healing as well. Fischl is another character. You could quick swap this character out as well for Yai Miko. A lot of consistent electro damage from off field that goes on for a very good amount of time in duration's sake. Raiden, even in of herself, even if you're running, let's say you want to switch this team over to having, Nahida. We've talked about, once again, multiple of the different characters kind of running, triple Dendro here to make sure maybe some buffs on Gilded or maybe some buffs on the First Great Magic could really run well with Tighnari to have 3 Dendro characters. So if you put, instead of putting Fischl here, you had, Nahida, possibly that could work. It's probably going to be actually extremely good just because of the Elemental Mastery buff, and at that point you can look at switching Baizhu over to an Electro Healer or something like that. But still, honestly, even if you have 3 Dendro characters here, Raiden's consistent, duration with her skill being thrown out here, I believe she gives that kind of consistent electro hits over and over again for a very long period of time. So no matter what, you have a 25-second duration of constant electro coordinated attack damage that can be hit pretty often with her as a character. So no matter what, as you're doing damage to things, she will be doing extra coordinated attack damage. And basically, if I had hit an enemy, the electro would be hitting as well. There is no range on it, so no matter if you're shooting an extremely far distance, the extra omen that Raiden's putting over you will still hit them with electro as well, allowing for constant application for there. So if you are running with someone like Raiden and you are using Raiden and then with Tighnari, you can get away pretty easily actually with running 3 Dendro characters at one time. Now, there are other teams that I know people do talk about, and that is like the Hyperbloom team or something like that, where you could kind of run. The issue I think I have mostly with this type of team is when you're looking at
What
this,
they do
Kuki has a
this
very
time?
small ring whenever she's kind of focusing on. There's just not a large AoE here. So when you're trying to constantly Hyperbloom with this as the character here with Kuki, you have to be very close to the Hyperblooms to make sure you're consistently making sure you're Hyperblooming everything. Because as Farina is going to be using her skills off field and Baiju and Tighnari are helping create the blooms, Kuki is then going to be the one that is going to be doing the Hyperblooms. At this point in time, while Tighnari's damage is nice, the main focus on the team is Farina's damage hits, but also mainly, looking at Kuki's damage hits. And so at this point in time, it's a little bit difficult to kind of look at what he's going to be doing versus Kuki. And also, you could also get easily knocked around while getting ready for those charge hits that you're doing. This also takes away from the fact that Tighnari is a quick swap DPS and likes to be going with other DPS characters that have a very short runtime. And there's no other DPS in this team unless you get, Farina over to C6, or you get Baiju absolutely cracked on some sort of other team that I don't know about. So kind of that idea with these other teams when you kind of run into them is my personal problem when looking at other teams, kind of that idea. But once again, there are plenty of other characters you could use. Catching is another character that could probably work extremely well with Tighnari as a quick swap DPS. She does have some extra on-field time that could kind of maybe go a little bit longer than you might want for Tighnari, but they are pretty good quick swap characters with each other. Another character that could also work as well is another Electro character, and that is going to be Chloron. Chloron also can work with him as well. She does have a little bit, once again, of a longer runtime than both Catching and Raiden, so she likes to be on field for a longer period of time, which most likely means that Tighnari is kind of your backup DPS rather than a quick swap, which it becomes a Chloron team at that point rather than kind of a Tighnari and quick swap team with some other character. He's kind of in there just whenever your main DPS Chloron kind of goes into a downtime. So with that, I would say to kind of just watch out for that. If you want a lot of damage to come out of your Tighnari, the best characters I think to pair him with are going to be, Raiden as well as Catching, one of those two characters, throwing in another Electro character that's really great on off-field application like Fischl or Yaimiko, and then throwing in a character like Baiju or another character like Yao Yao, who are going to be great at-field, who are going to be great for off-field application as well as great healers as well. Well, that's everything I've got talking about Tighnari. If you guys did enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you guys have any ideas kind of at looking at other characters that you might use him with, or maybe any other different teams, kind of the idea a little bit beyond that, he's going to be mainly focusing on a lot of those Dendro teams, and I'm sure Bloom teams could kind of maybe work if you kind of really want to maybe quick swap him with Nilou. I'm sure there's plenty of other teams that I didn't talk about that probably could be used, but please go ahead and just let me know down in the comments if you guys have any other builds or tips or ideas that you guys have for other Tighnari users. Once again, that's everything I've got, so thank you guys for watching the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.